Look at that. 10 whole incessantly pedantic reviews full of overused zoomer humor, far too quiet audio mixing, and opinions that are less aged milk and more blue cheese. Huh, on brand. I didn't think it'd make it this far. And I fucking mean it. Anyway, to celebrate that milestone, as well as achieving my goal of covering all of CI Games' AA stuff to date, for now, and seeing their steady progression from copy and COD to making actually good games, I thought it'd be funny to go full circle and chill with their old, cheap shovelware titles, looking at the baby photos, so to speak, back when they were slummeted as City Interactive. I will literally play bargain bin trash instead of things that are actually worth my time that friends have been begging me to play. And going to therapy. As much as I love good open-ended level design, I could really use this palate cleanser of brain-dead simple games to laugh at, like glasses of water. I sure picked a hell of a topic to usher in 60 FPS videos. And speaking of, I need to mention that I tried to stream these games and use the footage as B-roll just to experiment and see if I could combine two hobbies together. Unfortunately, for the first game, and really every stream from August to mid-January, OBS had automatically connected me to a server in the States instead of Toronto, Canada, so I was dropping frames like crazy, and so the resulting VOD caps out at about 40 frames per second. I did re-record it for the sake of quality, but you may see the video look choppier at points if there was something that I really wanted to show that specifically happened in the stream. Well, it's still better than when I made you suffer through 24 FPS. As for the rest, to avoid that issue, I recorded my footage simultaneously, and thank God. Now, before you say it, I am aware that CI's shovelware has already been covered by a couple of big FPS-centric gaming channels, especially G-Man Lives with his 45-minute diatribe on just about all of them, plus their AA efforts, which actually inspired this video in the first place. However, instead of only talking about them for a few minutes each, which is honestly entirely understandable if you're covering that many at once, I'm putting the shovel in shovelware and digging deep like I always do, at least until I inevitably hit bedrock. I also won't imply that Sniper Ghost Warrior 1 and 2 are better than SGW 3 or Enemy Front, nor am I gonna suck at Contracts 2. For the sake of making sure this video is of a reasonable length unlike the last one, we're limiting this list to 3 games that I've curated to try to avoid playing games that are too similar to one another, whether it's by making sure they don't share the same engine, or if they do, have different gameplay goals. So on today's trash tasting menu, we're whetting our appetite with SAS Secure Tomorrow, increasing the jank with Code of Honor, the French Foreign Legion, and finishing things off with Sniper Art of Victory. And every dish will be roasted and salted to perfection.
You fucking donkey!
Of course though, if there's anything I feel like praising, I will do so because I am an easily amused man-child. But before we go dumpster diving, I can't help but highlight this super long top comment on G-Man's video by a certain Jacob Majewski, who, according to what he wrote, his personal website, and his LinkedIn, was in fact a real CI developer, with his last project being Alien I Am Running Out of Fucking Ideas for this Stupid Running Gag, where he was an interim producer, design consultant, and scriptwriter back when it was called Alien Fear. While it doesn't seem like he worked on any of the titles that we're looking at today, let's face it, all of these games look basically the same, so I'm sure we can extrapolate that the events that surrounded these games can apply to my selection. If not the precise development process, at least the workplace culture. Which, I am afraid to report, didn't seem very good. While CI's shovelware era reeks of laziness due to them constantly recycling assets as stated by Majewski, quantity over quality meant that deadlines were super short, lasting about 3 to 4 months on average, and cramming well over a dozen games in about 4 years at most, leading to inhumane levels of overtime and morale-killing executive decisions just to get shit out of the door, despite the simplistic and unambitious nature of these titles. And that lack of scope wasn't what the devs truly wanted, if that needed to be cleared up. Particularly with the Jupiter EX era, the devs felt like that they could have made something genuinely good with that engine after they learned how to use it, but were never given the chance to, which killed their motivation even more. One of, if not the worst examples of this toxicity is Majewski's experience with being the project manager of Terrorist Takedown 2. I quote, "I recall one particular night towards the end of the project where I just lay there in bed staring at the ceiling until morning, because my brain couldn't stop trying to figure out how to get the game finished on time." According to his website, he basically lived in the office and worked on the weekends for months. It all culminated in a last-ditch all-nighter polish pass that still left behind a critical bug that took a few days to fix. Even worse, they still had to disable multiplayer but add it later in a patch. To quote again, "That's the most terrible project finish imaginable, by the way. You run ragged to meet a deadline and immediately get into a rush to produce a patch. As as well as a bunch of language versions. All of that suffering for a game that looks like this. Again, it's probably not unreasonable to assume that similar stories of stress and disgruntlement occurred during the development of these 3 games. SAS Secure Tomorrow had its project manager fired partway through, and the devs that worked on its levels were already pretty pissed that they had been cut off from Operation Thunderstorm, a game they allegedly did a decent amount of work for before being effectively replaced by a different team, as well as not ever being allowed to run their own projects again as a punishment of sorts. Undeserved, if the quotation marks are anything to go by. He did also try to shine a bit of a positive light on the developers in their situation though, if it even sounds positive anyway. On the ground floor, he believes that people did genuinely try their best with what little they've been given, and because these games were heading to the bargain bin from the start, they never felt like they were screwing anyone over. According to Majewski, while his colleagues weren't very happy with their short run times, they were simply making movie-length games that you could finish in one sitting for about the price of a movie ticket. Certainly more honest than most AAA companies these days at least. Unsurprisingly, none of these games got positive reviews from critics, and as I've mentioned in past videos, are a big part of the reason why CI still has such a terrible reputation among some people. It seems like the last fully budget game they made was Terrorist Takedown 3, which released just 2 months before they stopped their budget operations and attempted to get into the AAA, or at least AA, market with the first Sniper Ghost Warrior. And we all know how that turned out. But without further ado, let's crank on some silly music and give up our dignity while we look at some low-quality snark fodder. I've decided to start things off easy with something familiar to prepare our palates. Okay, not that familiar yet, with SAS Secure Tomorrow. As you can see, it shares a significant amount of DNA with an old classic that I'm sure at least a few of you know about. Fear, which gives it a stable enough foundation. But to share a story that I doubt you're interested in hearing, but I'm gonna share it anyway, I'm really inexperienced at shopping, because I prefer to purchase my games straight from the bounties of Lord Gaben himself like a good little boy, mostly. But finding a copy of this game was an absolute rigmarole. Despite probably being one of the more well-known shovelware games in CI's catalog, it's neither on My Abandonware nor Steam. And yeah, I know you could purchase it on Gamersgate, but I'm not paying $13 for this. So I was forced to dig through the terrifying soil of sketchy sites in search of any usable ISO, zip, or torrent. And for my spelunking journey, I found torrents that stall and won't download, setup exes that were flagged as malware, corrupted ISO files, sites that forced me to fill out surveys to fight spam, expired links, a mere demo of the game in Polish, and perhaps the funniest one, game.exe. Yes, this won't give me ransomware. To make things even more annoying, the laptop I've been using to safely test these things is running Linux. So it took a bit of time to figure out how to get exes to even work on it, and that included me needing to install a new distro because the last one was out of date and couldn't install Wine, and it wouldn't let me update the OS for some reason, forgot to take a picture. When I got Wine set up on the new distro, at that point I had already deleted the aforementioned setup exe that was apparently malicious, so I had to torrent it again. Except that it was even slower than before, even stalling at several points. It took maybe like 4 hours to download 2.4 gigabytes. And yes, I know it's not the safest thing to do, but it was on an old laptop I barely use, and I can just do another clean install since I'd barely lose a thing. After going through a frankly creepy looking setup wizard and more troubleshooting, I booted up the game on my sacrificial computer and simply put, it struggled to run it. So, I don't know if you can hear that. But, my laptop's fans are going sicko mode. So, without knowing for sure that the game works without it being evil, I transferred it to my main PC, scanned it with malware bytes just to be safe, and something was flagged as malware again. What, you may ask? The uninstall exe. So I guess whatever custom wizards are being used by these repackers or whatever just get flagged as false positives, and I was being very paranoid. Anyway, after all that, finally, the game is up and running on my PC and works without a hitch. It even natively has widescreen support. And thank fuck. I spent the better part of a day trying to get this damn game, and a good 75% of that struggle was because I was a dumbass. Furthermore, CI has a bunch of other games that share the same engine. Armed Forces Corps, the other Code of Honor games, Terrorist Takedown, Operation Thunderstorm, Royal Marines Commando, etc. And all of these can be found on my abandonware in Steam, and any of them would have filled the spot gameplay-wise. So why did I go out of my way to get this one?
Bloody hell! Bloody good! Bloody warrior! Bloody nothing! Bloody welcome! Bloody blow his sodding brains out too, innit? Biggest sodding problem. Sodding flesh. I'm a piece of knob cheese. Wankers twats. Do I look like a fucking Britannica to you? I don't know how they left. I know abso-fucking-lutely nothing. Ish. I want to go to a pub, get a few pints and tie a bun on.
That's why. I saw this one in G-Man's compilation and I just knew I had to check it out for some cheap laughs. My first impression was that this was gonna be a video game version of Hot Fuzz, except not good, so like lukewarm pubes? As one would expect for a modern military shovelware game, the plot's about as simple and unambitious as the game itself. A big, bad terrorist leader named 𝓹𝓪𝓲𝓷 has been broken out of prison by his army of goons called the Cold Path, also being helped by his accomplice Mark Cheval, and you, an SAS soldier dubbed Mint and your team of sassy baccas, have to stop them from destroying the economy in London, a plot point that has aged very poorly, and like any generic modern military story, secure some nuke MacGuffins in Greenland, funnily enough unlike any generic modern military story. My favorite part was when Mint said it's assassin time and secured tomorrow. I may have missed a few small details, but frankly, I really struggle to get invested beyond British memes. Can you blame me though? I doubt anyone's really gonna nail me for not 100% accurately representing shovelware stories. Like I mentioned earlier, SES runs on the same engine as the legendary Fear, Monolith's 𝓼𝓾𝓯𝓷, and despite being in the hands of a less experienced team with less money, it honestly doesn't look that bad generally. Obviously, it's by no means pretty, especially since it sometimes lacks the moody and atmospheric dynamic lighting that hard carried its older brother, giving it a flat and appropriately cheap aesthetic that's pretty rough by 2008 standards at some levels. But for me, there's still enough of that old Jupiter EX charm that helps it give off some character, and some decent use of color that occasionally gives the game a minor edge over Fear's gray monochromatic monotony. The offices in this game are much more vibrant and nicer to look at in a certain way, and the last area uses an intense dark blue to create an oppressively cold vibe that contrasts well with the warmer lights. If nothing else, it's at least a lot better than Perseus Mandate. There's even some praiseworthy things that are completely outside of Monolith's recycled handiwork. First of all, this is like the complete inverse of being nitpicky, not pocky. But despite being a bargain bin game, the fonts used for SAS's subtitles and other in-game text look and fit the game way better compared to Fear, which presents almost everything in default-ass Arial of all things. This also extends to the loading screens. Far more fitting and futuristic feeling fonts, surprisingly slick paintings of the level's scenery, and even a nicely voiced narration for the shovelware.
Cheval knew everything about financial systems, and Zarian knew the right people.
We got lucky this time. There was a broker in London Business Plaza who got into trouble doing insider trading. Cheval helped that lad out. The little twat got a chance of getting into the clear under one condition. He'll work for the Cold Path.
And completely empty, boring looking essays for the famous beloved classic. What a world we live in. The HUD's also really appealing too, especially compared to their other Jupiter EX games, which often blandly display their info in trebuchet with barely any extra graphics to supplement the text. It seems like there was actually some kind of an attempt at an aesthetic here, with the cyan lines around the ammo counter, the backdrop behind the subtitles and objectives, and the gridded minimap complementing the idea of the SCS being an elite, cutting-edge Spec Ops force extremely well. Dare I say, professional? Hell, even your weapon list and grenade counter both getting moved to the bottom right near your ammo is much easier on the eyes, rather than how Fear places them in different spots on your screen. Speaking of weapons, here's something that's probably quite close to a nuclear take.
Oh
god, no. SAS's gun models and reload animations are far superior compared to Fear. I'm not kidding or being hyperbolic. The weapons in the cheaper game have much more detailed models and really nice textures that give every gun a nice weathered look, compared to the supposedly higher budget game having ugly guns that look like baby's first blender project. As for the reloads, the former, while
Still a bit stiff. Still a bit stiff.
Still a bit stiff.
and objectively not good, has these snappy and sometimes playful looking animations that easily step over Fear's, which set the bar so depressingly low with reloads that are literally the bare minimum or do not exist, that I'm surprised that I've never seen anyone criticize them. If there was some way to port these over, I'd be down for it. Now watch as some mouth breather takes this section out of context and assumes that I'm actually saying that this budget title is better than one of the best and most influential FPSs of all time. Bitch, that's a whole new sentence! Lastly, the voice acting honestly isn't half bad. As silly as the script can be at certain points, the lines are delivered with a good degree of expressiveness that suggests there was a decent amount of care put into them. The frequent use of British slang, thick accents, and possibly some attempts at being tongue-in-cheek does also help an otherwise bland game go down a little smoother, although that could just be my uncultured Canadian brain talking. Of course, there are a few things that I think are downright bad. I can hardly call the blow-up dolls in the first Fear sexy, but the faces in this game? Jesus, I know this is straight up meaningless nitpicking since you only really see them in cutscenes, but most of them are built like Neanderthals crossed with a sloth, with mouths that tend to flap around like a proper Muppets. At least these are covered up by gas masks, so I feel right at home.
Doesn't want you to see his face because he's fuck ugly.
And check out the water coolers. So it looks like they're serving Vanna Black in this water cooler.
I am under the water. Please help me.
There's also this map set in Greenland, and here's my initial live reaction to it. But this looks absolutely dreadful. This looks so horrible. You can see the edges of the fucking map. SGW contracts, this isn't. Finally, the game has an annoying tendency to lag when saving a checkpoint, but I think that's just an issue with the engine itself and not from anything CI could have done. Gameplay-wise, SAS is as expectedly bare bones as you can get. Seeing as how it came out a year after COD 4 ruined gaming for a whole generation, it's just sucking the wee-wee to gargle the spunk of spunk gargle wee-wee. I don't think I need to painstakingly dissect each individual level, which after the last two videos, I could use a fucking break, because at their core, they're all insanely dull, linear corridors that rarely promote exploration and do not facilitate any kind of interesting combat encounters for you or the enemies. I have not seen a single area that has any sort of path to flank or otherwise engage combat in a meaningfully different way, and shit gets repetitive quickly, especially since you're going to be seeing the exact same layouts repeated at least a few times throughout levels. I have no idea why this game keeps being labeled as a tactical shooter. Leaning from behind a wall and firing down a hallway is not a sodding tic-tac. Tactic. That's weird. So like this cabin looks like it has two entrances, but you can't use one of them. Why not? That would have been like a good, like, you know, second entry point. Yeah, like you could have just gone through here and like stuck up behind them, but no. Mercifully, the game does avoid the issue of having enemies that endlessly pour out of clown closets that plague a lot of games like this, so at least there's a feeling of forward momentum rather than slow attrition. Compare this bland level and encounter design to Fear, which has a good amount of arenas with lots of room for everyone to maneuver and play cat and mouse, and if things do get sorta linear, there's at least a few extra rooms to maneuver through to keep encounters dynamic. A great example of this is the funeral home in the Extraction Point expansion, which I recall replaying so many times because it's just complex enough to make each fight feel different. If you want to see it in action, a good video to check out is the revered Rabbit Responds compilation of his friend playing that very map over and over. The only thing the game does to try to shake things up a little are these scripted slow motion breach and clear moments peppered here and there, but beyond being particle effect eye candy that invokes fear more than ever, you're just shooting a few dazed enemies at most, and it really doesn't add much. Sometimes there's only one guy, making it feel even more pointless. That being said, let it be known that SAS did the whole slow-mo BNC before MW2. Who's the copycat now? Because of the poor level design, I can barely tell whether or not the goal-oriented action planning AI that propelled Monolith's title into god tier status is neutered, or is fully present but can't shine in these restrictive environments. If nothing else, I've at least seen behavior such as NPCs diving through windows or vaulting over railings because, what's the matter, never taken a shortcut before? Reacting to your flashlight? Calling out when their squad's been wiped out?
They're all dead!
And they are fairly mobile and take cover often if they have enough to work with, which is a bit more than I can say with the next couple of games, so maybe some remnants are still there.
I need cover!
And speaking of AI, like any spunk gargle wee-wee, you've got some friendlies to fight alongside you, and they're a bit annoying, to be honest. I guess they're useful in the sense that they make good distractions and are straight up invincible, but they always seem to get in the way at the worst times. Because the levels are as simple and as small as they are, you're gonna bump into them a lot as you try to go through doors in tight spaces, or as they take cover in the same points you are, blocking your line of fire since you can't shoot if they're in your crosshairs. It's not the worst thing in the world, I guess, but the minor inconveniences do add up a little, especially if one runs right in front of you as you're tossing a frag. On top of that, they're responsible for the game's scripting at some points. There's some doors that you can't open, but they can. There was actually one instance during the stream where they froze and wouldn't walk to a door they were supposed to open. I really hate it when games do this. It's just so goddamn pointless. And no, despite being a tactical shooter, you can't give them orders, although you are a new recruit, so I guess that makes sense. Going back to the level design, particularly in the game's second location, it seriously has a bad habit of having a bunch of superfluous rooms that have nothing in them, nor add to the combat experience beyond containing a couple of mooks ready to ambush you. I initially instinctively inspected these rooms, hoping to find flanking routes or even just ammo, but my curiosity was more often than not met with a dead end and mild disappointment. At least in the outdoor Greenland levels, you frequently come across some cabins that do consistently contain ammo, which is something, I guess. The gunplay itself is probably the only thing that holds my attention even a little, but it's pretty much just because it borrows so much from Fear. Yeah, the encounter design is British food, but you still get the John Wooyan particle effects in classic ragdolls, even if they're toned down in comparison. Add on the much nicer gun models and just about passable sound effects that fit this game well enough, the combat does feel pretty good and is enjoyable in a very basic monkey brain sort of way. The guns themselves are about what you'd expect. Enemies occasionally feel ever so slightly spongy, but I'm not sure if that's a damage issue or an accuracy issue. Recoil is generally quite manageable too, with a couple of caveats and one big exception, which is a little surprising considering how much they'd fuck up this aspect 2 years later. Unlike its predecessor, SAS also has proper aim-down sights instead of the weird zoom. It's a bit janky, lacks a smooth transition, and is toggle only, but it's otherwise fine and I guess works well for the slower pace this game tries to have, especially since it drastically improves your accuracy. I'd also say there's a few guns worth highlighting here. The M4, which by the way is not used by the British SAS, basically your default weapon, is a humble workhorse on the surface. Aside from having somewhat annoying visual recoil, it doesn't kick very much otherwise. That is, until you press M by default to convert it into a suppressed DMR on the fly. It's a rather interesting feature in a game like this, and gives you a decent ranged option if you can deal with the slow but reasonably detailed swapping animation until you get the much more powerful L96. And no, this doesn't seem to help you be stealthy at all.
Damn cons, don't fool around. Move out! Let's take him out quietly.
Sure. Let's just see. Let's see how rudimentary stealth works in this. So much for that. Speaking of which, I think my favorite weapon to use is the suppressed MP5. The suppressor is, again, effectively superfluous, but it does at least cut down on muzzle flash, which makes aiming down the actually usable red dot, unlike Fear's, very nice. Therefore, this game is like 10 times better, because you can actually use the fucking sight, especially with this wide sight picture and non-existent recoil. The high rate of fire can also make pretty quick work of enemies, and it really makes you feel like an SCS operator. Overall, a surprisingly satisfying SMG. The shotgun, because it's always important to mention, is generally pretty good too. It doesn't sound anywhere near as badass as Fear's VK12, but at least it actually loads shell by shell on screen, rather than loading them all at once off screen.
Shame.
The last gun I want to address is the Bison, mostly because 1, the reload animation is charmingly playful as your character twirls the magazine in his hand before loading it, and 2, its recoil is practically SGW1 bad, so maybe avoid using it unless you've got nothing else. And also, despite attempting to be more realistic than Fear, you can hold 4 guns as opposed to just 3. I guess British people are just built different and can pack more heat. Alongside your typical frag grenades, which still explode when hitting enemies like Fear, although the throwing arc feels off and it's not something I recommend doing here anyway, you have your own flashbangs that, upon detonating, puts you into bullet time like the Point Man without having an NPC do it for you. Sadly though, you only spawn with 2, you can't replenish your supply unless I missed something, and they straight up disappear from your inventory halfway through the game. Maybe having more would have made the game more brain dead, but it could have been more fun. Also, they've added a blind fire function. When you walk up to cover, a little arrow will appear on your crosshair, and when you click to shoot, you'll inaccurately spray your gun in that direction. Why? You have lean buttons. Difficulty-wise, I played on the highest setting, because I'm a big boy gamer, and I want the biggest big boy challenge from my big boy shovelware games, and frankly, it's still pretty easy. You can't take too much damage before you drop, and I've had moments where I felt like I just got randomly one-shot, but as long as you don't rush too hard and take cover to regenerate your health, or have decent reaction times with ambushes, you really aren't gonna have too much of a hard time with it, especially with Angel and Butterman here fighting alongside you. That being said, I've also had a handful of super cheap deaths. Aside from getting one shot for no clear reason, I've been killed by enemy grenades that again, explode on contact, as well as being shot directly through walls. So that's fun. In conclusion, SAS Secure Ass is just as mediocre as I expected. It's a bland corridor shooter with most of its merits being things that are from the Foundation monolith and Fear built, like the combat, and not really anything that CI has done. Hell, it wasn't even nearly as funny as I thought it'd be. On a positive note, as faint as the praise may be, at least it's not genuinely insufferable. I've legitimately had far worse experiences playing the first Sniper Ghost Warrior, playing the other games on this list, hell, even Call of Duty. Compared to AAA Spunk 𝓼𝓲𝓷𝓰, it feels a hell of a lot less pretentious because it knows its place. This type of pretty much objectively bad FPS design is only worth $5 from the bargain bin, not whatever Activision is still charging for their outdated bullshit, and it actually respects your time. I'm quite slow at finishing games, and even I managed to finish all 11 of its levels in a single 2.5-hour stream, and when I played it a second time for smoother footage, I beat it in less than 2 hours. It's inoffensive, mindless, and just about passably enjoyable. A backhanded compliment magnet. It's like Fear if it was just mid. Oh, and before we move on to the next game, I want to show you the final cutscene because it's just so silly.
Flashbang! Drop it, twat! Drop the gun down on the floor!
French!
Now let's go from beer to shots and move on to stronger, jankier substances with Code of Honor. Thankfully, this game is on my abandonware, so I was able to safely download it with no issues whatsoever. Besides needing to replace the Chrome Engine DLL file with a different one downloaded from yet another suspicious source to get around it asking me to insert a disk I don't have into an optical drive I don't have. What's the fucking point of not having a crack on the first download? I also had to make a few other tweaks to make the game a little more comfortable to play. Firstly, unlike SAS, COH does not natively support widescreen, so you'll need to find the video settings.scr file, convert it into a text file, type in your desired resolution, and convert it back. This will mess up the HUD, especially the minimap, but it's a sacrifice I'm more than willing to make. I also had to cap the frame rate with Riva Tuner. I tried using VSync in my NVIDIA control panel, but it didn't seem to work, because if you don't, your FPS will skyrocket on a decent system, and the entire game gets ice physics. The FOV is also terrible, but the fix seems so damn convoluted. Okay, at this point I'm just too fucking lazy to write this correction seamlessly into the script or make it sound pretty, but it's worth more than being afterthought text. The fix was literally just a new DLL file away, and for one reason or another, I was led to believe I needed cheat engine. Writing and narrating Phann, get your shit together. I also couldn't find a way to lower the sensitivity. The default is at the lowest setting, and it's still a bit higher than what I normally use. And if you crank that shit all the way up, wait, how high can this go? As the name implies, you play as a French Foreign Legion legionnaire with an American accent.
Sierra 1, I'm inside. I see a couple of toys here.
And before you rush to your keyboards to look smart on the internet, let me explain. I know I kept throwing him under the bus, but I'm gonna defend G-Man Lives Here, who made the same comment and was mocked for it because it's the Foreign Legion, so it follows that you're not playing as a Frenchman. Which is sound logic, until you learn you're straight up playing as a Parisian man named Claude Boulet, so yeah, he should have a French accent. Y'all gotta brush up on your shovelware lore. Anyway, you're sent to Côte d'Ivoire to suppress rebel activity and something radioactive stuff, who cares, let's move on. Running on what I assume is Chrome Engine 2, which would return in its 4th iteration in the first Sniper Ghost Warrior, COH looks frankly pretty terrible for 2007, but did you really need me to tell you that? I'd argue this looks worse than Chrome, the first game to use this engine 4 years earlier. I guess I could praise the skyboxes, the probably well-researched African architecture and general atmosphere, the sunset in one level, and the general charm of shoddy old engines, but otherwise, I would have thought that this game came out in like 2000 at best, with its flat, bland lighting, short draw distance, and low quality everything. Guards. No guards. Guards. No guards. Guards. No guards. Guards. Hours of fun. And guess what game set in Africa came out a year later? The voice acting is also expectedly bad for a shovelware game, with stiff and robotic dialogue with awkwardly written scripts that are occasionally quite funny.
Tango 4, you're close to the enemy's fort. Focus.
Sierra, I have never been more concentrated in my life. Actually, I feel like a concentrate.
What does that mean? And I didn't expect to need to address music in this video, but there's straight up a track in this game that sounds like Five Nights at Freddy's. After a bit though, the music just stops playing, and I don't know if this is a bug or they just didn't even add it to begin with. Unfortunately, COH does not have the luxury of being cut from the same blood-soaked cloth of fear, so the combat has basically no chance of being good. Despite dealing adequate damage, mostly, and actually having some surprisingly punchy sound effects, especially the workhorse FAMAS, these are quite possibly the most impactless guns I've ever shot. Enemies straight up have zero reaction to being shot until their brain registers the pain signals. They seem to use the same few canned death animations that just don't quite fit the action, and there's so little blood and other effects you'd think they're anemic. This almost makes Half-Life 2 look like Soldier of Fortune. In addition, the iron sights are universally weird, ugly, and don't move correctly when you're leaning, and recoil just consists of obnoxious screen shake. At least hipfire is still pretty accurate, and again, it's still better than SGW1. Compounding the poor gunplay and sending the combat comfortably into the confirmed jank category, throwing grenades from cover is a hassle because they don't spawn in your crosshair, but rather from God knows where the fuck else, which caused me to yeet it into the very wall I was leaning from, which is a suboptimal tactic to say the least. There's occasionally some issues with hitboxes of environmental objects. One notable, shocking instance was this tree. It's so bulletproof it reinforced the air around it. Look at those bullet holes, can you see them? I know they're small, but look! And nicely pairing the lack of feedback when shooting enemies, there's also a lack of feedback when you get shot as well, giving you barely noticeable pain indicators placed at the very edges of your peripheral vision and nothing else. Reload animations are beyond bare bones, but frankly that shouldn't surprise anyone. As for the weapon highlights, let's start with some comments on the snipers. The crosshairs are really blurry and low res, making them a little irritating to use, and I hate that you can't aim them and lean at the same time. And while we're here, you can't walk while leaning, which I also don't like. Also, there's a ghillie-wrapped PSG that's pretty much identical to the one used in the first Sniper Ghost Warrior, so that's interesting. Despite sounding really powerful, the SAS 12 is probably one of the worst shotguns I've ever used, down there with Doom 3's, and I know how to use that thing well. It could pretty much never one-shot enemies, even at typical shotgun ranges, and coupled with the complete lack of enemy reactions, it's just laughable. And then we have the FAMAS. Statistically, it's fine as far as this game's arsenal goes, but I think it's cursed, and not just because it's French. Whenever I reloaded it, there'd be this weird model glitch that flashed shapes on my screen. At first it was subtle enough that it took me a moment to link it to the gun itself, but its disease eventually worsened. Great, so we have... Concerning the mooks, I normally despise AI bad arguments because they're often dropped with no consistent examples to the point where it's now just a meaningless negative buzzword. But while in SAS you could see moments of the old fear AI in action, here it's just AI in action. Wait. Caught lacking. Mooks don't seem to like to move around very much, and if they do, they tend to just strafe a few meters to the left and right. They rarely try to take cover, they get stuck in objects, and in some cases, even if you've gunned down their buddies nearby, they just stand around and do nothing. This guy's just vibing. What? These guys don't even... What is going on?
Is the president of the USA coming or what?
These enemies are so stupid. Wait, what is going on? So, ironically, even though there tends to be a little more room for enemies to maneuver in some maps, they're literally too stupid to make use of it, leading to bland and uninteresting encounters. I think a lot of their behavior is straight up scripted, as some enemies seem to perform the exact same actions every time you reload a checkpoint. To quote Majewski, Chrome was a remarkable engine to work with because it had the worst AI known to mankind. Actually, it really didn't have AI to speak of. The enemies would move straight from waypoint to waypoint and oscillated between deadly accuracy and total incompetence. The last sentence is quite true from my experience, especially since I played on hard. The health system is also different from the last game, using a finite bar that requires pickups to heal rather than regenerating automatically. Apparently that's one of the key differences between the Chrome and Jupiter EX eras generally. I feel like this is less of a double-edged sword and more of a chainsaw. On one hand, this system did make combat feel a touch more tense than SAS in every Call of Duty ever, since I either had to play super cautiously while I'm on the brink of death, or I could play a little more aggressively to get a medkit and instantly heal heal off any damage I took, both of which beat sucking my thumb behind cover until the game gives me permission to fight again. It's resource management. Other times, however, it can make the game bullshit difficult and practically require save scumming if you're seriously pinned down, or enter an encounter with little health, as we'll see later. Moving on to the levels, unlike the other games, my analysis will be more in-depth since there's actually some modicum of variety on display. At first, I was having a bit of an SGW2/Reverse Flowers for Algernon moment with this game. After playing SAS just a few days prior and sitting through its railroaded corridors and scripted doors, I was actually a little pleasantly surprised at the lack of handholding and attempt at openness in Code of Honor's first level. In my opinion, almost anything is inherently more intriguing than a series of corridors, even if it's just a whopping 2 whole objectives in the middle of a flat, empty field. They can even be completed in any order you wish, so the possibilities are binary. This is the most amount of freedom you'll be seeing in this video. There's not too much to say about these unassuming little outposts. The area to the right of your spawn point is the slightly more open of the two, having 2 entrances. Can't imagine it would change much, but whatever. There's also an APC on the inside that you can easily get rid of with a handy nearby RPG. The other is a very boxed-in village with only 1 entry point. Any combat that occurs within either of these areas is pretty unnoteworthy. The second level has an insanely rocky start because you're forced to destroy an APC with grenades, with your only cover being a tree that will probably block your throws. Okay, this took a few minutes and was bullshit, to say the least. The game didn't even let me keep the RPG I had in the last mission. Once I finally got past that, the rest of the level is probably what you'd expect. Aside from a dead easy sniping section from a tower that I guess makes things a little different, not really. The rest is your typical uneventful corridor shooting, but less patronizing because you're not constantly following an NPC. It's a very minor difference that to me does make this pacing go down smoother. The third level is set in an airport. It starts off with what I can only assume is the game's attempt at a shoehorn stealth section with even a single pathetic camera that, if it spots you, spawns 2 whole enemies. Oh no. From there, it's just more corridor shooting until you reach the airstrip, where you need to sabotage some planes while fighting off hordes of enemies. And I'm gonna say something that could age horribly, but for some reason, I didn't really mind this section. Maybe I just got really lucky, but despite how little cover there is, the issues with the combat, and how enemies seem to spawn out of thin air when you place a C4 charge, I managed to go on a bit of a hot streak and not die that often despite the odds, and even got a bit of a guilty power trip. I didn't have too many issues locating enemies that they spawned all around, I used what little cover there was well, and I even run and gunned without taking much damage in the end, even when I was playing on hard. Things just kinda clicked for me, but I don't know or really care if I could pull it off again. I'm hesitant to call this level good for fear of pissing off a future version of myself, who's probably thinking back to this very moment in the video and cursing me, but as far as Code of Honor alone is concerned, it's as good as it's gonna get. There's not like the level design is like amazing by any stretch, but what bar? Wait, what bar? Oh! The fourth level starts off in a laughable state, taking place in a linear, rocky desert path that has zero hope of providing any interesting fights. Not even a corner to slowly peek around. My viewers compared it to Hunt Down the Freeman. Once you finally get to the end of it, you approach a small castle with not one, but 2 entrances. The official one, and then a hidden one off to the side, which for a shovelware FPS is probably the most mind-blowing thing we'll see today. I could not be bothered to go back and check out the former. I doubt it'll be much different in the grand scheme of things, but the hidden path is probably a little more advantageous. On the inside, you've got a small group of enemies spread out inside some buildings in the courtyard and some snipers. Just more mindless, but mostly painless shooting against enemies that are even more mindless than usual. Up to this point, Code of Honor was not good, but tolerable enough to not really mentally weigh me down so much as far as shovelware goes, and it really threatened to make this video's emotional arc a straight line. It was pretty much just slightly less repetitive and railroaded SAS with jankier combat and no friendly AI to get in your way. Despite how cheap it felt, I've played a lot worse. And then it finally gave me reasons to hate it. I can now suffer for the funny internet points. From this point on, with a combination of worse level design and probably just me being pretty tired that late into the stream, although I can't tell if I lost my sanity or regained it, the game became so incredibly tedious and boring and I just wanted it to end. For nearly 40 minutes, or a third of the fucking stream, we're hit by 2 back-to-back defense levels that reuse previous maps that bring the game's design and pacing down to the worst of 𝓵𝓾𝓯𝓷𝓰, fighting off waves of enemies that all come from the same direction and all you can do is sit your ass behind cover and plank on autopilot until the game lets you leave. The game gives you the option to use a turret, but these things are absolutely dreadful to use. Aiming feels like you're underwater and it has repulsive screen shake when firing. Furthermore, you have to eventually destroy vehicles like APCs and helicopters using nearby RPGs, which were annoying in different ways. In the first defense level, the former often just mowed me down as I tried to aim at them, making it way harder and take longer than it should have, and as for the choppers in the second, they all took an annoying amount of rockets to put down, which made things even more drawn out. You could say I kept missing, but the rocket launcher they give you is supposed to fire homing missiles, so it's not really my fault now, is it? Oh, and there was a glitch with the enemy dialogue in that level, with one line that kept looping infinitely. Dude, I'm falling asleep. I'm the one who's actually playing it. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. And then they immediately follow that up with an insanely boring on-rails vehicle section, and I don't need to say much more than that for these parts, aside from the fact that the vehicle health was locked to 66% for some reason. It is at least broken up by some on-foot combat sections in enemy camps. While on paper these encounters are more interesting than the corridors because you're not so boxed in practice they're pockets of tedious frustration because there's very little cover and you may get into them with only half of your health pickups are risky, and I struggled to locate mooks that were shooting at me, so trying to make use of the space given was a bit suicidal. Maybe my luck ran out. The best way to deal with them is to play more defensively, which is boring, and results in fights that play like a corridor despite being the opposite. Watch someone just say I'm bad at games. Also, it randomly crashed after I tried to quick save after an encounter, which made me so tired. The final level, while not as bad as the last 3 and generally inoffensive, was just really tiresome by the time I crawled up to it. It's simply a matter of clearing out a bunch of bland rooms and corridors like before, pressing F to save the world, and the game ending without any cutscene or even credits. At least it gives me an excuse to close it sooner. Code of 𝓼𝓾𝓯𝓷 is in some ways the opposite of SAS. Instead of being insanely repetitive but consistently painless, it tries to have variety but frequently drops the ball in the second half, becoming a mentally draining slog every mission. And as if it needed to be said, the good half is overall just mediocre at best like the last game, but without the solid shooting and effects of the Jupiter EX engine. Yes, I had that little moment on the airstrip, but objectively it's nothing special and probably a one-off.
Congratulations, you're a failure.
The worst part? You're forced to be French. And there's no crueler fate than that. Oh wait, there's being forced to play this. 𝓵𝓾𝓷𝓰 is by far the easiest game to get because for some reason CI still has the courage to sell this thing on Steam. Yay, it's a business expense. As such, I didn't have to do anything to get it to boot up properly unlike Code of Honor, although because it uses the exact same version of Chrome engine, I had to do the same tweaks. Increase the resolution, which still messes up the HUD, and cap the frame rate to not slide everywhere. This time though, I actually managed to find a DLL file in a Steam guide that increases the FOV. Also, for some reason, NVIDIA Shadowplay thinks Art of Victory is called Sniper Path of Vengeance, a completely different game made by different devs that runs on a different engine. Shrug. As you can see, AOV is often considered to be the predecessor to their current main franchise, Sniper Ghost Warrior, and doesn't seem to be trying to ride the coattails of Call of Duty like the last two games. It even predates World at War. Yep, this time CA were clearly trying to rip off Sniper Elite instead. The first one of all games, which strikes me as an odd choice to knock off. While it did get respectable reviews, it didn't exactly spark a massive zeitgeist, long before the rival series became the somewhat overrated gore fetish extravaganza it is today. Unless it was popular in Poland or whatever, what audience were they aiming for in the first place? The premise here is that it's World War II and you're a sniper who needs to kill a Nazi general. That's it. Apparently you're supposed to be in the Red Army, but there's not a single Russian accent in this game. You have a dopey American accent and all your allies are British.
There has to be an enemy sniper in the vicinity.
It might interest you that further on there's a bridge and only 2 Germans.
I want to shoot him. I don't know how it managed it, but Art of Victory somehow looks even worse than Code of Honor, in my opinion. The latter at least has the inherent novelty of African settings, since they're so rare, and again, the skyboxes aren't bad. This game is the drabbest pastiche of 1940s Europe I think I've ever seen, with the depressingly dingy color palette, ugly murky fog, and the laughably shit draw distance robbing it of any chance of even approaching passable, even if the lighting is a bit better. It looks like an uglier Medal of Honor Allied Assault, even though it came out 6 years later. This is probably the most dated on-release World War II game I've ever seen, and I've played Raid. And despite that, I was still getting weird micro stutters. Either it's that poorly optimized or my GPU is dying. If nothing else, the UI looks like there's been some effort put into it. The fancy borders around the ammo, pulse meter, wind gauge, and range indicator fits the World War II aesthetic pretty well, the objective list looks like a notebook, and the map screen is surprisingly well made, even if it doesn't sync up with the minimap. It all makes the game look less cheap and bad than it actually is. Now look, I've played quite a few bad games across a wide spectrum in my time. I've played the hopelessly bland, the competent but disappointing, the infuriatingly smug, the grossly overrated, the downright frustrating, and even the obviously unfinished. But if you know me or have seen my other videos, you'll know that I always try to see and highlight genuinely good qualities in games that I otherwise dislike or even hate. When people said Art of Victory was the worst game in CI's catalog, I thought it was either gonna be a little janky, or it could even be mere skill issues compounding negative preconceptions about it. It's happened before. So like the last 2 games, I prepared myself to have an open mind and be mindful of my own mistakes. Surely it's just mid, right? Oh. Already, we're actually off to a bad start. Obviously, there's like... Oh. Wow, you die quickly. What the hell? You're gonna get me out of this cutscene here, game? Oh, what the? Well, I can just get shot while in the map screen, and they've spotted me already. We're way past pizza at this point. This is just eating feces. Hey guys, guess what? Pissing was actually more fun than playing this game. I don't think I've ever played a game so utterly devoid of redeeming qualities or even the slightest bit of competence. If this isn't the worst game I ever play in my entire life, I'll do a face reveal. Okay, are you ready for the pain? I can't even give the game a lick of bonus points for not channeling Call of Duty's brain-dead design, because in CI's attempts to push themselves and the engine to greater, more ambitious heights, they end up failing at just about every fucking turn, resulting in outright broken, barely playable trash. Even in the Sniper Ghost Warrior games I hate, at least the sniping was functional, intuitive, and even a bit enjoyable, as much as I don't like to admit it. Art of Victory doesn't even come close to grazing this incredibly low bar, because the rifles can't hit for fucking shit! There's barely any point in discussing the ballistics, since your shots will frequently just miss or phase through enemies even if you take it all into account. More often than not, you'll need 2 or more shots to kill an enemy, with the killing blow landing in the exact same spot as the other shots that did nothing. And yes, I know I'm playing on veteran here, but I've seen footage on Recruit where the aim assist dot is dead center on the sights and the shots still do fuck all. I've played mobile games that are better than this. I assume you have. There, that shot worked. Why did that shot work? What did I do differently? I didn't do anything And without any visible bullet or tracer, good fucking luck telling how much you need to correct. I don't think I've had this much trouble ascertaining trajectory since 𝓼𝓾𝓯𝓷 Elite, but even in that game, I can see that my misses are all errors on my part. This is how I imagine how hard some morons think aiming in SGW contracts is. Like, take a look at this. I actually somehow managed to go on a lucky one-shot kill streak before I'm unable to hit this enemy despite not doing anything differently. The cheese melts in the microwave, the sniping melts in art of victory. But I guess to stay on brand and go into further detail, the UI is generally unhelpful. The range indicator doesn't work at all, and there's no markings on the reticle, so making an educated guess on the bullet drop is impossible. The wind constantly starts and stops, but it's basically a moot point since I just waited for it to hit 0. The heartbeat monitor is less complex than it wants you to think. Your resting heart rate sits at 122 beats per minute, so apparently our hero has a case of tachycardia. Holding your breath will lower it down to 100, and sprinting will ramp it up to 144. And during this period, you won't be able to hold your breath until it comes back down. Simple as. The bullet cams have a mildly janky charm, I guess, so an infinitely small percentage of a point for that. Like Code of Honor, you can't lean and scope in at the same time, which feels like an even bigger problem in this game. Finally, you do switch from a Kar 98K to a Mosin Nagant later in the game, but frankly, they feel equally bad, besides the fact that the latter doesn't have a sound when closing the bolt after a reload. Too much Cosmoline, I guess. And stealth? Forget it. This escapes me. I have no idea how this shit works. Enemies will range from not doing anything while your shots ring in the air and their allies scramble as much as their potato-ass minds can compute, to instantly spotting you and gunning you down faster than you can react. Sometimes, I swear they know where you are before they've even spotted you. And no, there is no detection meter or any other form of feedback to let you know how visible you are, not even something as vague like in the first Sniper Ghost Warrior. It's as annoying and unintuitive as it gets. I'd say you should just ignore it, later levels do generally, but frankly, you should just ignore the game itself. More like stealth and awful, right? And once again, the difficulty has nothing to do with this. According to a walkthrough, the only changes are that enemies don't appear on the minimap and you don't get the aim assist on veteran. UI stuff. Stats are unchanged and shit no matter what. As for your backup weapons, the suppressed Luger is surprisingly strong, capable of one-shotting every mook, but it's so inaccurate and lacks any sort of use case because good fucking luck getting close enough to use it regularly without getting melted. You also spawn with basically no ammo for it, besides one mission oddly, and despite how strong it is in the hands of the Nazis, by the time you grab their MP40s to try to avoid using the sniper, you'll find that it's loaded with a mere handful of 999mm. Whether it's because the damage is low, inconsistent, or the gun's straight up inaccurate, it's stupidly hard to kill anybody in your laughably small burst of fire. And no, you can't stockpile ammo or refill it off of dead mooks. I'd rather use the assault rifles in the first SGW. Despite the uncontrollable recoil, at least they have stopping power. Because of all this, you're completely fucked in the few times you run into CQC situations. As I've mentioned, the AI is somehow even worse than Code of Honor's. The enemies are simultaneously immobile or constantly run back and forth, as well as both blind and aim body. AOV's level design is still pretty bad. Sometimes you might have a bit more room to move around and a couple of different vantage points to choose from, I guess, but the gameplay surrounding it is so abysmal, I don't even know why I'm bothering to be charitable here. Any alternate paths barely mean shit if enemies can still instantly spot you. For the most part, you'll be funneled through a bunch of boring, linear paths without much agency to speak of and zero reason to explore, with a lot of levels having tacked on areas with nothing in them to merely give off the illusion of freedom. What is this building for? There's nothing here. As the game progresses, the levels start to become more infected by Spunk Gargle Wee Wee because fuck it. I guess we're still appealing to the COD market, but significantly more painful. The levels in Stalingrad, I think, pretty much forego stealth more than usual, making you fight alongside friendly NPCs against already alerted Nazis in restrictive maps with more scripted events. And while we're here, your allies can hurt you for some reason, but you can't, because if you're gonna be annoying, you might as well be creative about it. Did a friendly just fucking kill me? This asshat fucking blind fired me. Honestly, there's really not much in the way of level design or variety for me to dissect here. I think it's more interesting to rapidly spew off all the soft locks, glitches, oddities, and other annoyances that I ran into instead, because the core gameplay being an unmitigated dumpster fire just isn't enough for AOV. For some reason, the first ladder I tried to climb was kinda broken. I grab onto it, but every time I press W, I'd get kicked off. Until it started working again, randomly. Don't you just love bugs like that? I had to restart a level because I ran out of sniper ammo because enemies constantly took multiple shots to kill, and again, the shitty handful of Nerf darts loaded in my MP40 were completely useless against the remaining mooks. Even if by some miracle I ran past their deadly hit scans, god I wish mine did that, the objective required me to kill everyone in the area, so yeah, soft locked. There's this one small part of a level where two enemies will always run around a corner and gun you down. Even if you react fast enough, you'll only have time to kill one of them with your sniper. Yeah, that's fair. English. Wait in concealment to arrival of general. Shoot in order to explosion silenced gunshots.
Alright, target eliminated. Time to get out of here.
I got soft-locked a second time in the desert path level. So I was supposed to shoot a bomb to explode some rocks to ambush a Nazi convoy. Naturally, because the ballistics are ballistic, I couldn't hit it and failed the mission. Okay, so I reloaded a save to skip the opening cutscene, and for some reason, the convoy wouldn't move along properly, and suddenly I was running into an invisible wall. I restarted the whole mission, only to be presented with a bugged out cutscene where my ally wouldn't approach me like before, and the invisible walls boxed me in even more. I just fucking annihilated the scripting! This also happened, and the only suitable adjective I can use to describe it is, eldritch. What the fuck was that? There was a small part of me that wanted to use this as an excuse to stop suffering through this wretched piece of shit, but restarting the game, loading a save, then restarting again fixed it, so I had to push on. And yes, I kept failing this section, so I had to keep closing and opening it. And after all of that, the game thanks me with this.
You took your time.
Fuck off! Where have I heard that before?
Jesus Christ, O'Neill, what took you so long?
By the way, I just want to say that it's clear that the devs just gave up on this level. It's just another wide, bland corridor with the worst draw distance I've ever seen. I'm also convinced that it's the same awful desert map from Code of Honor, which lines up nicely with the total absence of shits given. And then in the level after that, the final one, there's this fort that also shares a lot of assets with COH, where I ran into my third soft lock! So when you enter the fort, you have to make your way to a switch to open the front gate, likely dying a few times, so a friendly truck can roll in. The first time I did this, the guy in the truck somehow died, so I couldn't talk to him to continue. It didn't even have the good grace to give me a game over, so I had to consult a guide to figure out if I missed something. And you know how this game ends? With a text scroll! That was worth it! According to G-Man Lives, AOV took him about 90 minutes to finish, which included idling and sifting through menus apparently. God, I fucking wish that were me. Including minor troubleshooting, 2 short BRBs, a few level restarts, and many deaths, the fucking thing clocked in at nearly 3 hours of janky suffering. And let me tell you, this stream easily felt the longest. I was ready to tap out at hour 2 when I thought the game was over after I killed a Nazi general. Just listen to the sheer horror in my voice when I realized there was more. That's it. There's another mission! So yeah, if it wasn't obvious, unlike the other two, there's not a single moment and sniper toilet humor of not winning that's remotely tolerable, let alone passable. It transcends simple mediocrity and boredom and becomes an absolute fucking leech of dopamine and general mental well-being by fumbling even the most basic mechanics of what it tries to pull off. I had more fun writing this beatdown than playing it. It's not even funny bad, and the only thing that gave me joy and held my sanity together while playing it was the small group of friends that checked in during my live stream who commiserated with me. Much like a sniper, stay far away from this one. Yes, Majewski, I do think I deserve a medal. So, after all this, what did we learn? Nothing new, frankly. I mean, did we really expect games born out of quantity over quality to be anything more than boring and janky at best? At least I managed to actually analyze and explain why these games aren't good instead of boiling it down to a few naughty no-no words. To make things a little more interesting and less repetitive, let's summarize my thoughts by comparing these games to the awful first Sniper Ghost Warrior and what I'd rather play. SAS Secure Tomorrow is, without hesitation, a far more pleasant experience than SGW1. Despite having a smaller budget, being a nightmare to acquire, and having really boring level design, the shooting's perfectly acceptable all things considered, with guns that are actually usable. The Fear Engine charm is also a massive boon here too. Hell, I didn't even mind replaying it for better footage. I'd even say I'd rather play this over any higher budget Spunk Gargle Wee Wee. As annoying and tedious as the second half was, I'd also rather play Code of Honor. Not because I really like any part of it at all, but pretty much just because it's shorter. I'll suffer less. And on that note, as for Sniper Art of Victory, congratulations, SGW1, you're no longer the worst CI game I've ever played. I'd legitimately rather play you over AOV. Even if it has a short runtime like its brethren, it's a dense, collapsed star of broken gameplay and utter agony that renders that single positive point moot. If SGW1 is a marathon of pain with occasional water breaks, AOV is a 100-meter barefoot sprint on hot coals and broken glass while dragging a car. Fuck this game, smack it with a shovel and bury it. On the bright side, if nothing else, 1, I'm probably the only person in the world to have analyzed these games for more than 2 minutes each, so that does feel pretty cool. And 2, I think I have even more of an appreciation for just how much CI have improved since their dark shovelware age, having finally experienced them firsthand. Even if it took over a decade for them to make something reasonably well-rounded and overall competent in the first SGW contract, I guess that goes to show that no matter who you are, you too can become a better, more skilled person with enough time and effort. Now, ain't that heartwarming? Oh my god, look. They got the City Interactive mugs. Whoops.